Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace? Are you unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. I only recently started to be able to communicate to people, I'd say around 2 years ago. And I mean properly communicate to people. I think before then, maybe when I was 16, from 0 to 16, I used to not express myself to people. And so when things were bothering me, I would really just shut down, or if I did ever occasionally express myself, I felt it was only when I was really angry, so it was not good. And then around 16, I think it was because of it was during COVID or just after COVID. Between 16 and 17, I think I got good at being able to express my emotions to people. I remember I had this one conversation where I was talking with a friend, and she was talking to me about how she felt how two of our other friends weren't being supportive of her during, she had just gotten COVID, so during that time. And I was I called her out on it, and I was you guys weren't supportive of me though when I got into a car accident and everything was fine, but no one really came to check up on me, and I expressed how I felt. These aren't bad people. I feel whenever I talk about people in certain situations, I don't want to ever to seem I'm putting people down. But yeah, this was just one of the moments where I can truly, it's highlighted to me in my head where I was able to express how I felt, and not in necessarily a bitchy way about it. And so during that 16 and 17, I became better at expressing myself, but at the same time, I still wasn't able to communicate properly. And what I mean by that was I wasn't able to, and this is specifically in conflicts, but I wasn't able to accept responsibility for some of my own actions. I remember my best friend in high school, she and I were talking in her car one time after a lacrosse practice, and she was telling me how I was putting so many expectations onto her, academic wise, personal wise, and I couldn't accept that I had done that. So that conversation just led me to be oh, why is she accusing me of all this? I just want the best for her. Why can't she accept that? I wasn't actually comprehending what she was saying. I wasn't empathizing with her, and I also wasn't accepting the responsibility, the fact that I actually had done those things, And I also realized I was not good at communicating because I also have very selective hearing. I'm one of those people who someone could tell you 99 things about you that are so perfect and great, and they'll tell you one thing about you that's slightly iffy, and I'll focus on that. I'll put everything else aside and say 99 things don't matter if that one thing, and I'll blow things out of proportion in that sense. And so I also kind of got it, I've understood that in the past when I communicate with people, or when I'm listening to people, because that's also part of communication, that I'm not getting the entire message, and I'm just picking things out that bother me. And I specifically picked that one out because I focus a lot on, I have in the past at least, focused a lot on negative talk, and always wanting to approve, I'm never satisfied. But yeah, that also leads to lack of communication in some way or another. But yeah, I think talking about communication, even that concept is, it's weird, but it's also really necessary because, that's how we communicate with people. We do it verbally and we do it non-verbally, but being able to communicate as best as possible and being able to improve that, I think you should always strive for that because it creates better relationships and better connections with people and better understanding, right? And communication, I don't just mean this when you're talking about a conflict. I feel I am conflict oriented, but it's not just about conflicts, getting better at managing those, but just in general, how you speak to people. It's really important that what you're saying comes across in the way that you want it to come across to these people, right? And so I was doing some research, that's actually cap. I took a communications course last semester, and I was actually just thinking about it, that, you know, there's actually multiple different types of models on communication. For some reason, they all look the same to me. Like, there's like some small factors that like just throw it off a bit, you know? But what I was just thinking about recently was like how before you even go into a conversation, you're fucked. There are 4 things that are going to fuck you from the beginning. There are apparently 4 different noises that affect your communication before you even start talking to another person. Let me go over them, right? So there's physiological noise, right? So like that's like your body's response to things, right? That could impact how you take something in. That could impact how the other person is taking something in. Maybe they're having an allergic reaction to something, who knows? But that's affecting like where their focus might be going. Like maybe they could have, they stub their toe and their body has a pain or something like this. So their entire focus is not on the conversation, and maybe they're dealing with that emotion at that part, right? Then there's a psychological noise, and that's like mental, internally, what's going on throughout their head. Like, are they in the right mindset at that point? You know, like, do they have the capacity, and do you have the capacity also? Then there's physical noise, and that's just basically what's going on around you. Like, are you having this conversation in a setting like that's okay for the conversation to happen? Like, if it's a serious conversation, don't be having the conversation at a party, you know, small things like this. Because the surrounding is going to impact it. Like maybe you don't hear each other, and it could be literally small things like that that could like literally make something that's small erupt into a huge explosion. And then lastly, there's semantic noise. And it took me a while to understand what semantic noise was. Like even in class, I'd be like, huh? And it's basically, do you guys have the same like definitions, like the same meanings for certain things? Like it's like the understanding of words basically. And I think the most relevant time where I was like, okay, we actually have to talk about like the semantic noise that's going on is like, you know, when you're like talking to someone, and you guys are talking about dating. You actually have to talk about what dating is. Like it's crazy because like dating can be an entire different thing. It means like you're exclusive to this person. Like it could mean that for someone, and then on the opposite side for another person, it could just mean that like, oh, you're just talking to that person. Like you actually have to talk about what these things mean, because if the meaning is not the same, everything else, like it doesn't matter. Like it could get blown out of proportion, right? And so it's like really crazy to me to think that before you even go to a conversation, like, there's 4 things that are already gonna mess with it, and you have to check those things before you even have like a conversation about something. And I mean, yes, this is definitely like about conflict management and you know, actually being able to find a solution with a person. But it's not just for that. It's even in certain conversations, like you don't want something that was supposed to stay at level 0 to escalate to like 100 or 50, whatever, you know. So let's get into what I think communication is. And I'm gonna say what I think communication is because this one was not researched completely. But I think there's 3 parts of you know, besides the 4 noises beforehand, I think there's 3 parts of communication, and I'm not talking about like the models or something like this. I think there's listening. Listening is very different from hearing, okay? I think then there's communicating, right? And I know I'm saying communication throughout all of this. But when I mean communicating, I mean about, is it digestible for the other person? And then we talk about comprehension. And comprehension is about clarification. That's the way I see it. So let's talk about listening first of all. For me, when it's like, you're not in someone else's head, right? But for me, it shows me that you're listening to me when you're doing active listening. Active listening is my face is towards you, my body is towards you, my body language is like, I'm open, I'm reciprocative, I'm not distracted, I'm not looking at other things, small things like this. I'm actually just focused on you. That's what I think you're at least in the beginning stages of about to be listening to me, right? That's just like the physical aspect of it though. Then there's the listening without judgment, right? That's when you actually have to prepare your mental mindset to be like, I'm not gonna go into this with already having like these feelings towards another person, or already like, I'm already set in stone. I'm not gonna be flexible with what this person is saying. Like I know what I wanna say. So And if you go into like a conversation with that, then whatever that person's gonna say, like it could change your mind possibly, but because you're so set in stone and not flexible enough, you're not gonna take that in. And honestly, that could lead to a huge fallout for no apparent reason, you know? And I think the reason why a lot of us don't like to go into conversations without having our judgments set in stone is because I think it's our pride. I think it's our ego, you know, because we might not want to hear what's about to be said to us. We might not take it well, right? And like sometimes we don't want to, especially when you're going through those vulnerable conversations, we want to stick to our guns, right? And then when it comes to those conversations where someone's actually calling you out on stuff, those are difficult to have. Those are definitely difficult to have. Because no one wants to accept the responsibility that they did something wrong, because it conflicts with their character in most cases. But yeah. And let's talk about, so like listening again, I want you to prepare your mental mindset. I want you to focus on how your body language is to this person. And now let's talk about communication. Communication isn't just about like you speaking what's on your mind, right? Like, you know, in the past when I've had conflicts, I've created whole agendas. Those agendas don't do jack shit. Like they don't do jack shit like in certain situations in which it's not digestible for the person, right? When you're going into a conversation with a person, you cannot communicate to them how you wish to be communicated. You actually have to think about how this person processes certain things. And that's really difficult when it's like initial, like, okay, beginnings, you haven't known this person for a long time. But the more you get to know a person, the more you hear how they're thinking out loud and everything like that, you're gonna hear how they think, like how their mind is working a bit. So you're gonna know like, okay, even though this is like my full thought process on like this conversation, I'm gonna share with you these tidbits for right now because I know that's how you're gonna process them. You have to communicate to another person in the way that it's digestible for them. And that like goes with like, coincides with like semantics, are the meanings like equivalent to what their meanings are. And it goes into being patient, because that means that sometimes there's gonna be miscommunication and things because it's like, you're not that person. You're not gonna really know everything about like how that person thinks. So sometimes it is difficult to, you know, even engage or try to engage in that type of situation in that manner that replicates how they take information in. But I definitely think it is necessary and it does help. And adding along to that, when you are communicating to someone, right, and they ask you like, what do you mean by that? And you're like, what do you mean? What do I mean by that? Like, don't take on the defensiveness on this. Like, actually, you know, still explain to them, be patient with them, especially if you want to get somewhere. And then lastly, there's comprehension. And this is for the other person who has been listening this entire time. On with you want them to be able to kind of summarize, like, and that's why many people have like asked like, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, and I would hope in that case, like if they actually are willing and wanting to be there, they're definitely going to tell you like, okay, so like you're telling me this and that, and that's where you check them, right? And be like, no, that's not what I meant, because some people are like, they're taking information in, and they're not taking it in the way necessarily that you had imagined it to be taken in. You understand what I'm saying? You know, they can clarify now. So that's why comprehension, I believe, is about clarification. That's when they ask follow-up questions. That's when you are like, no, wait a minute, that's not what I meant. Let me give you a different scenario in which this is happening. And I think through these three like keywords, listening, communicating properly, and comprehension, I think that's how efficient communication is actually facilitated. And when that happens, I think that it's easier to have difficult conversations, and it leads to more solutions rather than like small little things of like, okay, them not understanding something, and you getting like, right now I can only say it auf Deutsch, but sickish. So like you getting like snippy with a person because they didn't understand it. Like, I think it takes that out of the way and just allows for a clear path of communication. And I think that's how then you are able to solve more problems. It gets easier explaining yourself, because it's kind of like a formula in a sense. Like, you're checking them, you're checking yourself, so that through and through, like when this conversation is happening, if there is a fallout or something we don't agree on, it's because we don't agree on it, and it's not because there were other factors that were influencing it, right? But you know what I've realized, like, I've met people who can communicate, like, over like the past few years, I've met people who can communicate really well. But what I've realized is that, you know, like the entire concept of like listening, right? And, you know, before going into it, like, don't have like a mindset where you're being judgmental to another person. You can't also go into that mindset without wanting to be there. So like, the question I want you to ask yourself before you're going into these conversations with people, or before you're going to communicate with this person, is like, how much do you want to do this? Because if you want to do something, you will put in the work to make sure that it is properly, that you're not letting small things come in between each other. But like, you know, you have like a conversation with someone who's like disinterested in what you have to say. Like, it could be someone who's hurt you in the past. Like, they actually just don't care, right? And you want to have a conversation with them. Like, they don't want to have that conversation with you. And because one part of the party does not want to have conversation, like, it's like talking to a wall, because there's no effort on that part. So ask yourself before you go into any conversation, how much do you want to be there? And check yourself, because sometimes you're just going there and like, you know, nonchalant, who cares, right? But then it's like, because you've gone into it with that type of attitude, maybe even with your pride and your ego, and you're not actually listening to what's being said, that could actually be beneficial for you. So, and if there are the conversations that you don't want to be in, then let people know. I mean, it sounds dickish, but I feel like it's better than having someone explain themselves and like you just actually not caring. So yeah, ask yourself, do you even want to have the conversation? Do you even want to communicate? Thank you guys so much for listening.